Okay, good afternoon again. We're happy that you're all here with us today. It's a very special occasion. Again, I am George Kappas. I'm honored to be with you. I grew up in this church, and I grew up with the Collis family, basically. So I'm very honored that I'm with you all today. Mrs. Collis came up with this idea about 2 years ago to have Yvette join us for this event today. Yvette is an outstanding writer and does an exceptional job of bringing Greek culture, Greek heritage into her writing, and actually we've termed it historical fiction. So we thank you for joining us today, and I'm glad you're having a good time in Cleveland. For those that have talked to her, she's awesome and just fun, and yeah. So currently she's living in New Rochelle with her husband Dave and 2 children. Just tell us a little bit about them.
And my dog, Tegan. She's a white lab. If you happen to follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see that I post far more pictures of my dog than I do anyone or anything else. She's the love of my life. And my mom. We also live with my mom. We went old school. We were living in Brooklyn, and I love Brooklyn. It was funny. I really got a real kick out of like being oh, you're a Brooklyn writer. And I was like, yes, I am. I am a Brooklyn writer. But we have since moved back to Westchester, to the community where I grew up with my mom. And we joke how everything comes full circle, right? We went right back to the multi-generational Greek home, which is actually the best thing ever. To see my children with their yaya, there's nothing better. So yeah, that's where we are.
Well, and in New Rochelle, she actually knew the Kyriakos family.
Yes, Father Peter was my childhood priest.
So that brought a lot of history back to us as well.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun to learn. You grew up in New York City. Where did the Manessis family originate from?
So we are originally from Corfu, Kerkyra, Greece. That's where my dad's side of the family is. My mom's side, I like to joke that I'm the surf and turf Greek. We have Kerkyra, which is the surf, the sea, and then my mother is from a little mountain village, Analipsi. But the Manessis side of the family is all from Corfu and Erikousa, which is a little tiny island off the coast of Corfu. For those of you who have read When the Cypress Whispers, that is where that book takes place.
And what was the family business?
Well, here in the U.S., like a good Greek family, it was restaurants. We've now transitioned to journalism. My husband and I are both journalists, and our daughter is following in the family footsteps. She's now working for NBC News, so as you can imagine, she's very busy at the moment. But yeah, so it changed from restaurants to journalism.
Yeah. And what got you into journalism?
Oh, goodness. I mean, again, any good Greek, I'm a storyteller, right? And I'm really nosy. I like to know everything, just like my yaya. I inherited that from my yaya. I love the news. I love the media. I love knowing things. I love speaking to people and learning their stories. And I think that's what drew me to journalism originally, was to an insatiable curiosity. I'm curious about everything. When I meet someone, I want to know their story, what inspires them, where they came from, what they're doing, how they navigate, what are the details of their lives. And that's what journalism is, or what it's supposed to be, is finding out about people and their lives and telling their stories. And I am so fortunate that I'm now able to marry the 2 aspects of storytelling in both my journalistic career and in my books.
You're a 3-time Emmy Award-winning writer. Your first Emmy was at the age of 26.
Yes.
Amazing. How about the other 2?
So the first Emmy was at 26, working in news. And then the last 2 were more recently, and those were for Best Entertainment News Show. In my day job, I'm a senior supervising producer with the TV show Extra. Any of you who know entertainment news or Extra, that's me, that's my job. So I won 2 Emmys for producing that show.
Awesome. You also received the Silurian Press Club Award.
Yes.
For those who do not know, that is one of the oldest clubs in the nation. It was founded in 1924. What was that award for?
So that award was for an investigative series that I produced. It was at the very beginning of the internet, and I produced an investigative series on keeping children safe on the internet. And that's what I won my Emmy for, and that's also what I won the Solarian Award for.
In 2013, you received New York City Council Controller's Award for Greek Heritage and Culture. Did that stem from your love of mythology?
It did. I was around that time, I was just in the process of publishing my first book. It was out the following year, and having worked in news and dealing with City Hall for so many years, and my father was very involved in New York City politics and Greek politics, and as word started to spread about what I was doing and how I was marrying my love of Greek culture with historical fiction, I was very honored to receive that award from City Hall.
Any other awards?
Several Emmy nominations. That's about it for awards.
Okay. All right, I'm going to step down and we'll let Yvette speak, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers after that. Okay?
Amazing. Okay, thank you, George. And hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. I cannot thank you enough. You guys have welcomed me so warmly and beautifully, and I feel like I've made a room full of new friends and family, and I'm so grateful to you all, and Helen especially. From that very first phone call, I just knew that I instantly fell in love with you, and now I've fallen in love with every single one of you and your family, and I cannot thank you enough. This has been the cherry on top of a pretty extraordinary week, I have to say. I feel like we're here celebrating. I'm not one to brag, but I want to share something with you. This is a celebratory event because we are here, of course, celebrating our shared Hellenic history. People are paying attention. They're paying attention, and they're seeing the value of our stories and how fascinating our stories are. Because just this week, and we're here celebrating the launch, publication of my new book, Daughter of Ruins, which you all have a copy of. I was so grateful to be able to sign for each of you here today. Well, just this week, I have already told some of you, Oprah Daily, Oprah Winfrey's website, named Daughter of Ruins as one of the 10 must-read and must-talk-about books for November. So, thank you. I'm still levitating on cloud 9. All those months locked away alone in my office and bedroom, and while my family was doing really fun things and I was by myself, often on the verge of tears, all of the hard work has paid off, and I'm so grateful to be here celebrating with you. So thank you. Thank you. We have a lot in common in this room. We are one family, and I say all the time, I write these stories, I love to share these stories, I love to write these books, and while they are my stories, they are very much our stories, because our collective experience in this room is so similar. We all come from the same places. We all had relatives who had such challenges and faced such difficulties to make that transition from back home in Greece. How did they end up here? How did my family end up in New York? How did your families end up in Cleveland? For us to be here together, living these shared American dreams, it didn't just happen, right? There was struggle and sacrifice and difficulties. And people ask me so often, why do you write? Why do you share these stories? Well, it's because I have a certain nostalgia for a Greece that I know and fear my children and grandchildren won't know. They won't experience all the uneducated, illiterate yayas waiting at the port, waving the madili to see who's coming and going. That doesn't exist anymore. And so I have such a love of my memories of those moments spent in Greece and my family, and the yayas and the mavra. It's such an honor for me to share these stories. And I love history, I love fiction, I love marrying the two. And I have to tell you, I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, as George told you, And I'm going to be honest with you, I loved my yaya. There was no question I loved my yaya. But growing up as one of two Greek girls in New Rochelle, New York, in a very thriving American and Jewish community, my yaya was not like everybody else's. Like, not even close. Everybody, Booby, Nona, Nana, they drove Cadillacs, they went to Bloomingdale's, they got their hair done, they wintered in Boca, and they made things like mac and cheese and like Fluffernutter. My yaya wore the Mavra Madili. She lived in this country for 40 years. She never learned to speak English. And she, would make psaro supa, not mac and cheese. And I loved my yaya. I loved her dearly, but I wanted to be like everybody else. I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon like the Brady Bunch, but we would go to like Astoria to make lucumades for the Yordes, and that's what we did. And it was wonderful, but I wanted to be like everyone else. We were not. And I loved Yaya. Yaya and I both had bedrooms up. We shared a floor. Our bedrooms were next to each other. On her side of the wall were posters of Ayo Spiridona and Panagia. And on my side were Duran Duran and Rod Stewart. And Yaya never learned, she was never educated in school, but yet she was extraordinary. I remember coming home for a weekend while studying for finals. I had a double major in classical civilizations and journalism from NYU. And I remember coming home to study for my exams, passing Yaya's room, and as I was studying for my degree in classical civilizations, I passed Yaya, who was sitting up in bed, struggling to read a children's book of myths. This irony was not lost on me. From her lifetime to mine, how different our lives were, our experiences. Let's not kid ourselves, our opportunities. It didn't just happen. Every sacrifice that she made led to every opportunity that I had and that my children have. But like, many Greek American children, I loved my yaya, but I didn't stop to listen to the stories. I didn't ask the questions. And it wasn't until later in life, after I became a mother myself, that when I held my daughter in my arms, that I thought about one of the stories that my yaya shared with me, which became the inspiration for my first book. And that was how my yaya helped hide and save a Jewish family from the Nazis during World War II, when my papu was in the United States, separated during the war. And she was alone with 2 children, and yet she risked her life, she risked the life of her children in order to help hide and save a Jewish family. And it wasn't until I stopped and thought about the extraordinary things that my uneducated, illiterate, impoverished yaya did that really gave me pause, and I realized just how extraordinary she was. And that was the inspiration for my first book, When the Cypress Whispers. That book tells the story of Daphne, a Greek-American restaurateur who has a magical, beautiful relationship with her yaya, again, inspired by my yaya's life. And it was in exploring that book and writing that first book that I realized the power in storytelling and the power of the stories that are in our homes. Because up until that point, I don't know about you guys, but I always imagined that history was something confined to a classroom. That history was something confined to dusty textbooks taught by very highly educated professors. I thought that heroines were women painted by the masters in oil paints hanging on museum walls, or perhaps written about on the big screen that you watched in a movie theater, devouring a bucket of popcorn. But I didn't realize until that moment that history exists in our homes, shared in the stories around the dinner table while stirring the cazaroles, telling us about life back in the old school. I didn't realize until then that heroines are in our home. They're the yayas who did extraordinary things during the war to save their children, their families, their homes. And yes, like my yaya and so many others across the country, other women's children at risk of their own lives. Why? Because it was simply the right thing to do. There were no awards or accolades. It was the right thing that good Christian people do. And that's history, and those are heroines, and they are all around us. They're in every single one of your homes. And these are the stories that inspired me to tell the stories that I write about today. So Daughter of Ruins, which we're here celebrating today, is my 4th book. Again, thank you so much for the honor of sharing my story and this launch week with you. And this is a story that's very personal, as all of my books, because Daughter of Ruins is very much about giving voiceless women a voice. Because as we know, at a certain point in history, women like my Yaya, who were raised to believe and were told that their worth and their value were confined to the kitchen and the bedroom. Many of these women were told their opinions didn't matter. Many of these women of certain generations before us were told that they were only as valuable as their dowries, as their brika, the kedimata that we talked about at dinner last night, right? How many kedimata is your dowry, and that's going to be how valuable you are to your new husband. We're so much more than that. We're so much more than that. For so many generations, women were silenced and not given the platform that they so rightfully deserved. But they did it quietly, and they did it amongst themselves. And they helped each other, and they helped others in ways that should be written about on the big screen. But these were our grandmothers, our yayas, our tias, and they were amazing. So in Daughter of Ruins, I tell the story of some of these women, women who were voiceless at a certain point in their lives, and I give them voice now. I share their hopes and their dreams and their heartbreaks, and I mostly share stories of their triumphs and how they strive to be heard when no one was really listening to them except for each other. And in Daughter of Ruins, I also share the difficulties of the early Greek immigrants. You know, people like to ask me, like, well, what inspires you? You never know what's going to inspire a book. So I'm warning all of you, a conversation that we could be having today might kind of germinate a little seed. And if you read a book in 10 years that sounds familiar, well, thank you for the inspiration. But you never know what's going to germinate an idea. So in Daughter of Ruins, when my children were applying for college, I remember my daughter immediately, her hand went to check white, right? Ethnicity, race, white. And I went, wait a minute, are we white? And she said, well, of course we're white, Mom. What's the matter with you? And I thought about my papu, who came over again right before World War II. And his generation were not considered white. The Greeks were called the dirty Greeks. The Greek immigrants they had such struggles. They were told they weren't white enough. They weren't wanted. They were targeted. They were boycotted. They were targeted by the KKK, which of course is how HEPA came to be, to teach the early Greek immigrants how to assimilate more into this culture and society. And so when my daughter went to check the white box, I thought about this, and I thought about what the early Greek immigrants to this country went through. And isn't it something that within the span of 1-2 generations, my children immediately imagine and consider themselves white when their papu was called a dirty Greek. And that sort of germinated the seed of, wow, people don't really understand or know what the early Greek immigrants went through. They don't necessarily know that when all the men came over here to make money to support their families, they wanted to build a life in America. They wanted to build a foundation. They wanted to build the churches, which were, of course, the fabric of the community. But there were no Greek women here to do so. So that leads us to the Greek picture brides. Where were these young immigrant men going to find women to marry? Well, part of the solution was the impoverished villagers back in Greece. Many of them couldn't afford to feed their children. Many of them couldn't afford dowries to marry off their children. And so they brought the Greek picture brides to the US. This way the men here had women to marry and build homes and families and communities and churches, and the impoverished families back in Greece had a way to feed their families and to hopefully give a new opportunity to their daughters who didn't have opportunity in Greece. So these are the stories that resonate with me. These are the stories that are so important to me. And these are the stories that speak to our shared experiences and remind us of the fact that, this beautiful luncheon here this afternoon didn't just happen. So many people, so many families sacrificed and went through so much for us to be here. And so when someone says to me that one of my books inspires them to look at their own family, their own story, and to remember the struggles and the sacrifices and the joys, right? The beautiful, beautiful foundation that we all come from in order for us to be here today, that means the world to me. That means more to me than you take the Emmy, you take the award, it doesn't matter. When someone reads my book and tells me that they felt something, that for me is what it's all about. And again, these are my stories, but they are our stories. And I hope that when you read my books and when you read Daughter of Ruins, that you are reminded of your own family, history, story, and hopefully inspired to jot those stories down or have a conversation with your children so they too know that every opportunity that they have came on the shoulders of somebody else. And it is an honor for me to share these stories and remind us of these collected experiences. So thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, there's one.
So is there a story behind how your parents met?
How my parents met? Oh, yes, there is. So as I mentioned to you, my papu was here before World War II, and then they were separated. After the war, he was able to go back to Greece and bring the family over. So my dad came here when he was 15. They settled in the Bronx, like so many Greek families, and he went right into the New York City public school system, not speaking a word of English. In fact, my dad later became very involved in Greek American politics, and one of the first things he did was make sure that Greek was included as English as a second language, so Greek children who came over did not have to deal with what he dealt with, of not having any help or knowing anyone who spoke the language and having to navigate this new public school system. So my dad came over at 15. He was not only the first to go to school, first to get a college degree, he went to NYU, my alma mater, and like a good Greek boy, he went into the family business with my papu, and they had restaurants. My mom came over when she was 18. She came over as a nurse or a helper for one of her aunts who was making the crossing. I think she had a 3-month visa, but of course, we know how proxenias work. And there was a dinner planned for my mother to meet my father, and they were married in a civil ceremony within 6 weeks, and then 6 months after that was a church wedding, and then my brother and I came along a few years later.
I wonder if the first book of yours that I read was Something Beautiful Happened. I wonder if nonfiction is the one nonfiction.
Yes.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that and your connection to the Jewish community as a result.
Of course.
I know it's a painful subject.
No, that's okay, thank you. So Dean was talking about I've written 3 historical fiction books and 1 memoir. So Something Beautiful Happened is my memoir, my story of my search for the family that my yaya helped hide and save. As I told you, my yaya's story of saving this Jewish family was sort of the inspiration for my first novel. And when I wrote that book, I realized, I was like, oh, it's not enough for me to fictionalize this story. I want to finish this story. What happened to this family? Where are they now? Do they know that an entire island risked everything to save their mothers? And I started digging and searching, and it took years and years of dead ends, absolute dead ends. And as I told you, I never knew that history existed outside of textbooks. Well, here's an example of it. I studied in Israel as a college student. I went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, and I walked through the gardens of the righteous, and I saw the trees planted in honor of the righteous Gentiles who risked everything to save their Jewish friends. And I cried and I learned. But you know what I never did? I never once stopped to think that my yaya's story was as important and significant as the stories that I was reading about. And why? Because I never realized that history exists in our homes. So I started thinking about Yad Vashem, and I reached out to the researchers there who helped me, and after a couple of years, I got a letter back saying, I'm sorry, it's a dead end. We can't find this family. We don't know anything about them. Until then, I met a Jewish, incredible, brilliant man. He's the CEO of an Israeli genealogy company called MyHeritage. And I told him about my search for the family, and he's the one who helped sort of crack the nut to help me find this family. I'll give you one example of how we found them. Like, those of you who are into genealogy, this is gonna blow your mind. So we knew one of the women, her name was Spera. And we thought that she ended up in Israel, but we couldn't find her in Israel. And we knew that one of the other girls was named Rosa. So Gilad Yvette, the owner of MyHeritage, went and looked for all the records of all the women who emigrated to Israel from Greece after the war, named Spera. But then he realized, well, Spera is not a name that people use in Israel. Spera comes from the Spanish word esperanza. Esperanza means hope. And any Hebrew speakers in the room? Does anyone know what hope in Hebrew is? Tikva, exactly, tikva. And tikva is a fairly common name. So instead of looking for Speras, he looked for anyone named Tikva who emigrated to Israel from Greece immediately after the war. And he found hundreds. But then he looked for anyone named Rosa who emigrated after the war. And he mapped out their locations. And on a tiny street in Tel Aviv, he found a Tikva that lived just down the street from a Rosa that came over immediately after the war. And he realized that after everything these women went through, coming over together after surviving the Holocaust, they probably wanted to be near one another. And that was them. That's how we found them. I picked up the phone to call the granddaughter. Gilad gave me the phone number. She's in Los Angeles. She's a television executive like myself. We actually have friends in common. I'd been searching the world to find this woman, and we had friends in common. So I picked up the phone to call her, and I'm crying, and I'm saying, I can't believe I found you. I've been looking for you. And her response was, what are you talking about? She had no idea, because like so many Holocaust survivors, when the women got to Israel, not only, they didn't go straight to Israel, because when they left Berea to go to Israel, they landed in Israel on an illegal refugee ship. When the ship got to what was then mandatory Palestine, the British soldiers turned them away and sent them to a refugee camp in Cyprus for 2 years. These two young women who lost everything and everyone survived the Holocaust only to spend 2 years behind barbed wire in a Cypriot refugee camp. When they finally got to Israel, they were told, never look back. That doesn't exist for you anymore. Only look forward. Your future is forward. So they took this to heart, and like so many Holocaust survivors, never discussed the Holocaust with their families. It wasn't until I found them and was able to share with them what I knew about what happened to their family that we were able to piece all the pieces of the puzzle together, and we gave this family their lost history. When I found Rose's family in Israel, and I shared this with my table mates, when I found Rose's family in Israel, she has 2 sons and 3 granddaughters. They said, thank you. We had no idea, because Rosa never talked about it. On Holocaust Remembrance Day, the sons were told to stay inside to pray and mourn for the family who were killed in the Holocaust. And they said to me, but until now, we never knew who we were praying for. So my second book, Something Beautiful Happened, is the story of how I found the family my grandmother helped save, and also, unfortunately, a horrific tragedy in that 3 days after I found the family my grandmother saved from the Nazis, there was a shooting at a JCC in Kansas in 2014 where 3 people were murdered by a Nazi white supremacist, neo-Nazi white supremacist shouting Heil Hitler. 2 of them were members of my own family. So 3 days after I found the family my grandmother risked everything to save from the Nazis, My 14-year-old nephew and his grandfather were murdered by a man here in the United States shouting Heil Hitler. Now, unfortunately, the story continues because, I would like to say that I love talking about my books, if you haven't noticed, but this is the one book that I never want to talk about again, but there is a need. I would like us to get to the day where anti-Semitism is no longer a part of the conversation, and I no longer have to talk about this book. But until then, thank you. Until then, I will continue shouting it from the rooftops, talking about this book, because the story continues. Remember I told you Michelle, wonderful Michelle, who told me she had no idea how that my grandmother saved hers? Well, her cousin's husband is a hostage in Gaza. On October 7th, he was at home in their kibbutz when Hamas came into their home and held him, his 2 children, and wife at gunpoint. They let the children and the wife go. Thankfully, they're okay physically, but he has not been seen from since. They did release one video of him several months ago, but there's been no other news of him. So sadly, the story continues, and hopefully we will have good news and we'll know how the story ends, but I still don't know how the story ends. So that is, unfortunately, the very timely story of my second book. So thank you. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. I appreciate that, and thank you. And I do write about the forming of a HEPA in Daughter of Ruins. One of the main characters, Pericles, he is the father of our main character, Dimitra, and they have a very difficult relationship, and he's a very difficult man. And when you learn more about his backstory and history and the things that challenged him in his life and made him lose hope and faith, that I bring the creation of a HEPA into the story. And I was also inspired because, as we know, the Greeks were discriminated against. They were chased by the KKK. They were boycotted. They were their homes, their businesses were firebombed. We know about the Greektown riots in Omaha, where there was a beautiful, thriving community of Greek businesses that were decimated and destroyed because the white mob came after the Greek community. And so I write about the formation of a HEPA, and I was very much inspired. I saw a photograph several years ago, and it was a black and white photo taken probably in like the 1930s, maybe early 1940s, but most likely 1930s. And it was inside of a Greek diner in the Midwest. And you had like the bedraggled, really ragged, exhausted lurking Greek diner workers, the men behind the counter, and they were serving the customers at the counter who were young black men, which of course we know did not happen very often at the time. But so many Greeks said, we know what it is to be discriminated against. Why would we discriminate against another community? And so they welcomed and served the black community when others closed their doors to them or would only serve them takeout, but not allow them to come in and have a meal at their counter like the Greek community did. So again, it is such an honor for me to help shed light and remind people of these stories and the importance of remembering these stories. Yes, hi. I'm sorry. Yes. So you're referring to the reunion that we held in Edigusa. Okay, so getting back to something beautiful happened. I have to say, something really beautiful did happen. It's such a difficult book and difficult story, but the title comes from the fact that the night that my nephew was killed, I climbed into bed with my 9-year-old son, and he turned to me with tears in his eyes, and he said, "But Mom, you told me the Nazis were gone. How could this happen? How could they do this to Reet?" And I didn't know how to answer that. And this book was my attempt to answer this question for my son and my children, and to explain to them that even in the darkest moments, people should and do the right thing and stand up in the face of evil. Their great-grandmother did. She stood up in the face of, the Nazi death squads during the Holocaust and did the right thing. And in the wake of my nephew's murder, our family has done extraordinary things and build foundations and educational systems to help combat anti-Semitism and hate. And so one of the ways that I wanted to do that was to show my kids what we are capable of. And so when I found the families, we organized a reunion, and we went all together. We brought them back to Greece, to Corfu, to Erikusa, and we held a ceremony on the island welcoming them home, and were able to show them where their mothers hid and were saved. I took them to my grandmother's house. I took them to the priest's house where they lived during the day. And because of my friends at my heritage genealogy company, we actually were able to find the grave of their grandfather in the Jewish ceremony in cemetery in Corfu. So we were able to bring the family to the grave of the grandfather they didn't even know about, and they were able to say the Jewish prayers of Kaddish at his grave. So that was the answer to my children. See, something beautiful can and will happen if only you let the light in. And so that's sort of one aspect of that story that continues. Yes?
With your background in media, any chance that any one of these books might be made into a movie or documentary?
There's always a chance, yes. So as far as the documentary, this has been a very difficult road for me, I will be honest with you. So something beautiful happened, as we've just been discussing. I do have a documentary on this. Every step of the way, as this journey and story unfolded, as I found the family, as I went back to Israel to meet them, to interview them, in Kansas, in Greece, the reunion, I had cameras with me every step of the way. We have everything documented. We have a documentary shot. Mind you, now there are more chapters to be added to this documentary, depending upon what happens with Michelle's family. And I met with the Shoah Foundation, with Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, who are pitched hundreds, if not thousands, of films every year that they say no to. Well, they said yes to me. Hold your applause because it gets more challenging. I'm going to give you the full story. So they accepted us and said, just bring us the film and we will help you from here. Well, this was right before COVID, and the friends who were helping me, we put everything on our credit cards. We traveled the world. My friends who have a production company put everything on their credit cards at their own expense to come with me to document the story, which we did. But when it came time to putting the film together, COVID hit, and they could no longer take the time away from their company because they were trying to keep the doors open of their company and not lay off all of their employees. So we've been stalled. So I'm very hopeful that we will get the funding needed to finish the film, especially now that there is a new chapter with Michelle and her family. The story continues in the most unbelievable way. So we're now just kind of coming up for air and hopefully going to go out and try to find the funding to finish the film. But we've been stalled for the past couple of years, which has been very difficult. And the rest, from your mouth to Hollywood's ears. You know, look, everybody loves the idea, we all do, but to actually have a deal is not an easy thing. So we're waiting and praying for the right deal. Thank you. As do I, hopefully. Let me tell you something, if that project doesn't kill me, I don't know what will. I mean, it depends. You know, my first book was very much an experiment in, can I do this? It's actually, so here's a crazy story. People magazine actually just did this story a few weeks back for the launch of the book. So I was, as you guys know, I work for Extra, working mom, 2 young children. All the working moms in the room know what I'm talking about, like on the hamster wheel, exhausted, giving away every part of myself to everybody else. I literally felt like I had failed the day before I got out of bed because it was just endless. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, to write my own book, but I didn't know if I could do it. I was sent to interview Carrie Underwood, when she just won American Idol. Here's this young girl. I was backstage at Regis and Kelly, and she was just levitating from joy, and she said to me, I can't believe I get to live my dream and be a singer. And I looked at her and I said, I want to know what that feels like. What's my dream? I want to be a writer. And that very weekend, I sat down and started writing my book. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I just sat down and I just free-flowed it. And I had no idea. I had no guidelines. I just knew there was going to be a girl named Daphne and her Yaya, and Yaya had a secret. And it just, it took me all over the place. But eventually the book got written and it got sold, and thankfully it did very well. But after that, I'm hopeful that with every book, I'm improving as a writer. My process has improved. I'm hoping that I do think that Daughter of Ruins is my best book for a few reasons. So I approach things differently now. I definitely have more of a plan. I have more of a strategy. I have an outline. But let me tell you something. When you sit down and these characters come to life, they will take you in a direction that you never anticipated because they start talking to you. When you build these characters and create these characters, they take on a life of their own, and they take you where they... In this book, Maria, the picture bride, I kind of had an idea that I wanted, but the minute I started writing her, she just came to life. She would wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go downstairs and tell her story. And, I know I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. But it just, sometimes the story just takes on a life of its own, and you just have to go with it. But I'm an early morning writer, though. I'm a 3 a.m., 4 a.m. writer. But since I have a job and a family, I'll write anytime I can. Airplanes are great. I cover the Super Bowl every year for Extra. That's my gig. I know it sounds like a lot of fun, but it's not. It's not easy. It's a really, really difficult week. I delivered this book to my editor, my final deadline, as I was covering the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce Super Bowl in Vegas. I was interviewing Travis Kelce every day, okay, and then running back to my hotel room to finish, so I made my deadline. So it's like, I know other writers have their offices and their candles and their mood lighting, and I'm like, wherever I can bang it out. Anyone else? I'm sorry? Yeah.
My favorite book, Where the Wandering Ends.
Oh, yay. I love that book. So Where the Wandering Ends, actually there's such a cool backstory to that book. So Where the Wandering Ends is my second novel, and it is historical fiction, and it takes place in Corfu during the Greek Civil War. Now, similar to what I experienced interviewing people about the Holocaust and Holocaust survivors and trying to find information about what happened to this family during the Holocaust, we have similar experiences in our culture because the Greek Civil War was so traumatizing that many people still don't want to talk about that. And I realized, why is there such a glaring omission? Why is it that, and I know Queen Frederica is a very polarizing character, but a generation of children were nearly lost and taken behind the Iron Curtain during the Greek Civil War. Thousands and thousands of children were taken from their families, lost, many never to return to Greece. Why don't people know about this? We know about the kinder transports of World War II, right? We know about the orphan trains of the Great American Depression, but no one talks about what happens to the Greek children during the Greek Civil War. So I knew that was sort of a fascinating area for me to tap into, But the story was also very much inspired by an old friend of mine. So when I was in my early 20s, I was working in New York City in a newsroom, and I was on the assignment desk, and my boss came in and said, Yvette, I want you to meet Nicholas. He's Greek like you. Hi, Nicholas, nice to meet you. Tall, handsome, lovely, British accent, the nicest guy in the world. Well, Nicholas was Greek, but not Greek like me, because Nicholas was actually Nikolaos, the son of King Constantine of Greece. And Nikolaos wanted to learn, he loved news and wanted to work in news, but he didn't want anyone to know who he was because he wanted to be judged on his work ethic and not his pedigree. So, I found out pretty quickly after, because at the time his brother was getting married, Pavlos was marrying Marie Chantal, it was like the biggest deal. Every royal family in Greece was showing up, and there's Nikolaos and I like ripping scripts in the newsroom. Well, I found out fairly quickly who he was. We became fast friends. I adore him, we're friends to this day, the nicest guy in the world. Think of the irony, though. Here he is, the son of a king, related to every royal family in Europe, has anything and everything that money could possibly buy. The one thing that Nikolaos wanted, the only thing that he cared about, he wanted to go back to Greece. His family at that point was still in exile. The only thing he wanted was to be able to go home to Greece. I, the daughter of Greek immigrants, working towards our American dream, I told you, my yaya, uneducated, impoverished, on Erikusa, came over, worked hard in the diners and the restaurants. But guess what? I had the luxury of going home to Greece every summer. Now, his yaya's house was a palace. Mine was a little two-room house in the Choryo, but I had what he wanted. And no amount of money in the world could give him what I had. And the irony of that and that friendship and the two of us who had such different experiences in lives, but yet the one thing that bonded us, we both had the same home. And the only thing that either of us wanted was to go home. So my friendship with Nikolaos was the inspiration for Where the Wandering Ends, because it's very much a story about two friends who were separated during the Greek Civil War, and all they want to do is go home. And this was so fun to write, because Nikolaos' family, of course, Athens and the palaces, but his family has a summer palace, Mon Repos in Corfu, where my family is from. It's where Prince Philip was born, on the dining room table. It's where Nikolaos' eldest sister was born. And so not only do we share so much, but we also shared a connection to Corfu. And so my relationship with Nikolaos and this shared love of home inspired this book, and it inspired me also to tell the story of the Greek royal family and Prince Philip, and how he came to be the husband of the Queen of England after being born on the dining room table in Corfu. So that's Where the Wandering Ends, and I know, it's like asking me to choose a favorite child. I just, you ask me about each of the books and I'll just go on forever because there's something I love so deeply about each one of them. So I'm glad that you enjoyed it, though. Thank you. I love it, too. I love that book. Anyone else?
Just a small correction about the Civil War in Greece and stuff like that. I know that Nicholas Cage,
Eleni, yes. Yeah. Yes, it's well documented with you and I, but if you ask anyone in this country, most people will tell you they had no idea there was a Greek Civil War. So we know about it, but history books don't necessarily study the Greek Civil War like they did the Kindertransports or the orphan trains. Greeks know about it, don't discuss it as much, but most Americans have no idea. Yes? That's amazing. How fortunate your family. Oh, wow. Oh, thank goodness. That's wonderful. Wow. Amazing. Amazing stories.
This has been a very beautifully emotional day. We thank you.
Thank you.
It's been our honor to have you. I'm not
Thank
kidding.
you. I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah. Yvette's book, Cypress Whispers, was released on April 1st. So there's a special prize on each table. So whoever has the closest birthday to April 1st, you win the prize in the middle of the table. So you can all fight against each other, but April 1st is your date.